It was something I'll never forget. It was 1993, and I had just flown into Krasnodar. Krasnodar is a city that's deep inside of Russia, and I was standing on the curb at the airport. And I'd been standing at this curb for about 3 hours, waiting for my contact to come pick me up. He hadn't shown up. My luggage hadn't shown up either. All I had were the clothes on my back, a briefcase full of specialty tools, and a very large sum of money strapped to my chest under my shirt. I was alone, traveling alone. I was very concerned at that point, but I also was never more alive. And I'm not going to talk to you today so much about the Russia experience, although I will come back to that. I do want to talk about how we as individuals can come fully alive, and what does it mean to come fully alive? Now, I'm going to ask a question, and I don't want you to raise your hands because this might get on video, but how many of you have been in a situation where you thought, I'm not sure this job I'm in is really what I'm meant to do. I'm not sure that I'm living my life to the full potential of what I'm supposed to do with my life. Again, don't raise your hand. Well, if you're like most, a lot of people have. Henry Thoreau wrote, "Most men live lives in quiet desperation and go to their graves with the music still inside them." Now, you might say, what does he know, right? He lived 150 years ago. He lived in the woods. That's really not relevant. He didn't have internet. He didn't have Facebook, so of course he was depressed. But let's take a chance and modernize this for the modern age, okay? The millennial age. Let's change men to people for obvious reasons. And let's change live lives to working cubicles. Because we don't live in the woods, we're chained to our desk. And I'm not sure that's an improvement. Let's change the idea of quiet desperation to something else. Because I haven't seen quiet in a long time. I'm going to change that to connected disengagement. We are now more plugged in than ever in terms of connected, but at the same time, we're also a bit disengaged. You don't believe me? Go to any coffee shop. Go to any kind of public establishment where people are there together, and you're going to see people more plugged into technology than ever before, and at the same time, more unplugged from intimacy, unplugged from real conversation. Well, that's not all. We now have an age in the workforce that has come into being that was told that everybody gets a trophy. Everybody wins. Yet, not everybody's getting promoted. Not everybody gets the corner office. So there's a little bit of a disconnect in terms of expectations. But at the same time, as Ron said, we should all be able to change the world. Well, that's a pretty good expectation, but then what do you do if you don't know how? There's a problem, right? There's another expectation. And now we have an explosion of choice of what you can do with your life. Back in Thoreau's day, if your dad was a farmer, you were pretty much going to be a farmer. It was pretty well predestined. But today there's so many choices, and it doesn't matter if your dad was a butcher, or your mom was the baker. You could be anything you want to be. Barry Schwartz, a professor, did a lot of research on the paradox of choice. And what happens when we have so much choice in our life, those individual choices have less meaning. They have less connection for us. And so we're seeing this plethora of choices. If you're still not convinced, well, I think we could look at the recent research from the Gallup Employee Engagement Survey that talked about 71% of us today are disengaged, not happy, discontent with our work. And that number has been going up. That's a pretty startling statistic. So perhaps Thoreau was right. Perhaps Thoreau was onto a human insight that we should pay attention to. But let's don't stop there. How about go to their graves? Well, I hope we don't just finish work and die. That would be horrible. No, we like to go to Florida. And so the goal here is to retire and go to Florida. Now, I have nothing against Florida. My dad actually is retired there, but I have learned some things from going down there and seeing the place, that there's really two types of people in Florida that have retired. There's those that lived a flourishing life, and all of a sudden, they just continue to blossom and be happy. And there's those that had the quiet desperation, and they tend to get more bitter. There's not a lot of in-betweeners. You're either bitter or you're really joyful. And I've seen that, firsthand. So I think that's appropriate to stick retiring to Florida in there. And how about the music? What is the music that Thoreau talked about? I think he's talking about the music that's the unplayed music. The music that we didn't really get a chance to play out because we worked our work lives at 80% and never saw what 100 looked like. So we'll call that the untapped potential. So now let's look at our new quote. Most people work in cubicles of connected disengagement and retire to Florida with untapped potential still inside them. Now, that's a pretty morbid thought. But 71% of us live in that world. I think there's a better idea. We're at TED. We should be talking about new ideas, right? A better idea is the idea of flourish. Flourish is a powerful word. It's packed with great meaning. Imagine a world where we all flourish and grow well or thrive. Imagine your company where everybody there was prospering. And imagine working on a team where everybody on your team was operating at the period of their highest productivity and excellence and influence. I mean, imagine what that could be like. My question is, what's stopping us? What's stopping us from flourishing? Well, I think Ron talked about it at the beginning. It's our mindset. It's our belief systems. We stop ourselves. You see, our beliefs drive how we behave and how we act. And our beliefs are based on what we think is true. And I know for me, I've had times of those beliefs in my head where, rehearse these stories. You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not fast enough. You're not tall enough. All these things that we rehearse. And so we need someone else to help us unlock these beliefs, because we tend to start looking for truths that reinforce these beliefs than to really see truth as it is. So I want to talk about, how do we unlock that? What are 3 simple numbers in a combination that we could look at to unlock the potential in others, and perhaps as well in ourselves? And the first one is the number 1, coincidentally, which is the invitation to connect. And I mean connect, I'm talking about this idea of a bigger idea than just social media connections, right? I mean, we have social media connections right now. We know what that means, to be friended, to follow, to link. It's really quite impressive how many things we can get invited to. But don't think that isn't a serious thing, though. I mean, I made that mistake a long time ago. Back in 2009, I unfortunately bought into the Burger King Whopper campaign, where if you defriend 10 people, you got a free coupon. And so I went through my 250 people on my list, and I said, I really don't know these people that well. I mean, And I found out that I had 100 friends that I could get rid of without too much damage, I thought, and got 10 free Whoppers, which was, very, very exciting thing to do. The shame that I brought on myself, you thought I created the unpardonable sin. I was getting all kinds of comments like, dude, our friendship was only worth a Whopper? And Burger King got a lot of negative feedback, and they stopped that pretty quick, but don't do that. I'm talking about a deeper invitation to connect than that. I'm talking about, how do you create intimacy and connection with people so that they really invite you into their life. And a different metaphor I like is the Argentine Tango. And I like this because it's an interesting example of what an invitation can be. The Argentine Tango is a very intimate dance. It's very close in. And you don't just swing your partner around as the lead. You try to get to know her. You try to understand, what is she capable of? What can she do and what can she not do? And then you create an inviting space, and then you invite her in. And it's up to her to make that move. And if she does, it's a beautiful thing. If she doesn't, it's not so good. You want it to be a beautiful thing, so you have to know, and that's the kind of invitation that I'm talking about. The second number in the combination is the number 5. And this is about the invitation to the quest. A quest is important. You have to have a quest if you really want to do something amazing and have a fulfilling life. Antoine writes it well. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood. Don't assign them task and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. So a quest is inspiring. I remember back when we sold our company to Saatchi, this big New York agency, and I hadn't had a boss for 9 years, and the day the stock swapped hands, I called up my new boss, Kevin, who was very provocative, very inspiring, though. And I said, Kevin, I'm kind of new to this, a little bit rusty. It's been a while, so, you're my boss now. Tell me what I got to do. And he said, well, first, let me tell you something. Never call me your boss. I want you to think of it this way. I'm your older brother. You're my younger brother. And together, let's go change the world. He didn't ask for spreadsheets and business plans and strategies. He just said, let's go change the world. That was inspiring for me. It changed the way I looked at everything else that was going to happen. And over the next several years, we started opening offices around the world. And my vision of what it could be was very different because he made the quest inspiring. The other thing about a good quest is it's got to be meaningful. It's got to have meaningful work to that. Viktor Frankl is a guy that I really respect because he lived through the Holocaust as a psychologist, and he looked at how did people survive and why they survived. And he wrote a great book called Man's Search for Meaning. I really highly recommend it. It was a great influence, has been an influence on me. But he said, life is not primarily a quest for pleasure, as Freud said, or as a quest for power, as Arthur Adler taught, but as a quest for meaning, that we need meaning in our lives. And we can give meaning to other people all the time. And it's not about quitting your job and going to work for a social cause or a social good thing. You get meaning where you are. Oftentimes, I would be the last guy in an interview chain to interview a new candidate to come to our company. And for me, the person that had the biggest influence on whether we hired him or not was the receptionist. Because I would call her, before I took that final interview and say, how was that person? Were they kind? Were they generous? Did they have a good spirit? Did they respect you? Did they show deference? Those are the things I cared about. And the receptionist saw her job as the ambassador to our brand, the first point of entry, and she took that job very seriously. She had meaning. She was definitely part of our quest. And the third part of a good quest is it has to bring out the grit. Okay, good quests are not easy. They're hard. They're really, really hard. We probably have all seen the P90X thing where, the first time I saw that, I thought, man, nobody's going to like this. This is horrible marketing. But, try P90X. You'll almost die. It's really, really difficult. And I aspired to be the before picture, let alone the after picture. And so I was like, this is insane. Nobody's going to do this. Until I started meeting guys that were doing it. And there's these millennials, and they're all like doing it with groups because it was a hard quest. It was difficult. It had challenge, and that's what a great quest is. So, but there's a catch. Nietzsche said, he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how, right? As long as there's a why, people will walk through walls, but there's got to be a why. The next number in the series is the number 50, which is the invitation to the spoils. When we do something hard and we do a big quest and we conquer and we have victory, we have to share in the spoils in order for there to be meaning. Now, there's two types of spoils. The spoils of the normal things we talk about, the loot, the bounty. We want to be sharing in the bounty. Unfortunately, today, a lot of frontline workers don't get to share in the bounty. After the corporate take, there's not enough for the bonus and such. That's an unfortunate thing because it's part of the symbolism of creating value that your job had meaning. So I'd encourage anybody that's in that job to do that. But the second part of a good quest and story is the idea of sharing in the spoils of a story. See, I think this is actually a more powerful part of sharing in the spoils sometimes than just the financial side. I was on a project team early in my career where I was the project leader, actually, and had to integrate an acquisition into a big company. It was really difficult, under-resourced, under budget, and I just didn't think we could do it, but we did it. And the mid-manager boss didn't have any way to give out spoils from the war chest, as most people in corporations are a little bit limited in that regard. But what he was able to do was actually more important to me. He wrote a project recap that had every project member's story of what they did, the role they played, the heroics that they had worked on and accomplished, and made that a laminated piece that went to the executive team. And then held a ceremony where he shared these stories. And today, 30 years later, that's still an artifact I hold on to because he made my story part of his story, part of the bigger story. Okay? No one can take away your story. You might spend all your loot, but you won't spend all the stories. Let me go back to where we started. I was on this curb in Russia, worrying about what to do next. Let me tell you how I got there. This is actually my second trip. The first trip was a year earlier. I went with a group of people to work with kids in schools. And on that trip, I got to meet Yuri and Sasha, two wonderful people. They were in poverty, but they had talents. And they invited me in to their life on that trip. Sasha was a seamstress, and she wanted to open up a sewing machine, a seamstress shop, to put people to work as a way out of poverty. Yuri was a master carpenter, but he didn't have any tools. And he wanted to create a workman type thing to get people to work. They had plenty of raw materials, but no tools. So I was back a year later with the cash and some tools to get these two people started in life in a different path. Yuri eventually showed up at the airport. I think it was probably my fault on the time zones, but not after I'd sweated it out for about 4 hours waiting for him. And we got things going. And all of a sudden, their lives began to change, and they began to flourish as they started to put people to work and earn their way out of poverty. But at that time, something changed for me, because you got to realize where I was. I was at a big corporation, had spent 9 years there, and if you do the math, 9 years is about a third of the way through the career, right? And I could tell by then that I could see the other 2/3. And unless there was a big change or some catastrophe, I was staring at those beaches in Florida. I mean, I saw it coming that, what quiet desperation might actually be. And so I decided to make a change. and decided that this idea of entrepreneurship and helping people change and unleash their potential was what I wanted to do. So I created my own little clout score formula where basically if I could be a person that had an impact in a person's life as one of their top 5, that would be a beautiful thing. And it would be a worthy thing. It would be a way to play out all the music. And so my dream is that, for a person, if they look back at their life and say, Andy was a guy that influenced my life, that helped unlock a potential in me, that changed my course. I thought, boy, that would be awesome. But if I could do it for 50 people over the course of a career, then that could be, even better. So now you know the combination. One person trying to be an influence in the top 5, and hopefully over time, 50. Now, in the process of starting companies, you end up, not everybody wants to be on that quest, and it gets difficult. So I changed it fairly recently to a net 50, because there's going to be times when I'm in the bottom 5 of the guy they don't want to be around. So that keeps you working harder, because I'll never know, where does 50 really play out. And so that's my life quest now, is to do work that I can invite people to join, to try to change the world for good, and get them excited to be part of that quest. And, wouldn't it be cool if we looked at this quote and said, it doesn't have to be that way, right? We don't have to spend our careers in quiet desperation or chains to our cubicles and not really finding that. But what if I could invite you to join me on a different idea, where we could say a quote more like this: I helped someone come alive and work with worthy purpose so that they could flourish and retire with the joy still inside them. Wouldn't that be a cool thing? Thank you.